first of all, thanks a lot everyone for joining us for this masterclass session today. Welcome Sonupam and thanks a lot for taking out time for today's session. So guys, I'll give you a short introduction about Sonupam before we begin. She has led products for American Express for the past 8 years and is now building products for Walmart Labs. In today's session, we are going to discuss how to build confidence to HPM interviews in FAANG companies with her. So over to you, Sonupam.
Yeah, thanks, Piyush. And really insightful session so far from all the other speakers, right? Pamit, Tanya, and Vaibhav. And also huge shout out to all the participants, right? On a Friday, if you guys are here attending this session and trying to learn more about product management, I feel like that's kudos to everyone who's here with us today, right? The topic for today actually talks about, how we can build confidence to ace PM interviews at FAANG companies, right? So while the title suggests FAANG companies, I truly believe like the framework or the things that we will speak about in the next few minutes could really be applied to any organization which is more global in nature, large scale, right, where PMs may want to work, right, solely due to our inclination towards the product, the people, as well as the processes which are employed in these organizations, right? So let's try and see how is it that we can really build confidence, before and while appearing for the interview process in some of these large-scale organizations. I feel for me, while I've written that it's a 4-step process, it really boils down to 2 key aspects, right? The first one being, why do we not feel confident is because we really have the fear of the unknown, right? We don't quite know what is it that the interview or the hiring process will look like in each of the rounds. What is it that the interviewer or the organization may be testing me on, right? So the first step, that I would recommend to everyone is to genuinely be proactive in trying to research and understand the overall hiring process of each of these companies, right? Now, while at heart, typically each organization is trying to judge you essentially on your PM skills, cultural fit, your problem solving approach, etc. Right? Some of these things we actually covered in one of the previous sessions, which took place about a few weeks ago. But still, right, few companies do have a standard way of doing it, and having the knowledge of that pre-hand will really help you build more confidence because you know what is going to happen, right? Or you at least know in what shape or form some of the rounds may get conducted. The second thing I would say is that, once you have had like some insights into the hiring process of one of these organizations or the organization that you're targeting, you really then have to sit down and prepare, right? So like Vaibhav said, right? So sit down with your CV, try to see what are your key skill sets, what are the key stories or key projects, that you have worked on, which you would like to highlight, right? And also what are the various achievements to which you would literally want to drive your interviewer to, right? To make a better or a stronger case for yourself to eventually get selected. The third and the fourth point essentially say that, once you have done step 1 and 2 with fair amount of research and rigor, I would say practice a lot, right? Like practice all of your answers, go through a lot of mock interviews, right? Sit down and rehearse it with your peers, with your mentors, with your colleagues, right? And after each interview, really sit down and think what was being asked and do a self-assessment to say why you did a good job versus where is it that you still need a little bit more nudging and preparation to put you at a good spot, either in the future rounds of the same organization or even with other rounds of other organizations, right? So I would say that this is the entire framework. In the next few slides, I would say we could go into certain smaller subtasks of each of these tasks and also maybe give you a few examples which I or some of my close friends may have gone through in the interview processes of FAANG or even related companies like Microsoft, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Right? So like I said, right, in the first task of your 4-step process, you have to be really proactive in trying to make sure that you have researched around the interview rounds and the specific skill sets that this organization is going to evaluate you on, right? For example, I think most of us already know that Amazon typically tests you on its 14 principles of leadership, right? So they may conduct 4 rounds to 6 rounds, right? But the essential goal of each of the rounds would be to really test you on one or more of the leadership principles, right? So I've taken actually a snapshot of the leadership principles. So if you were to know this pre-hand, you would be better, in a better situation to appear for these interviews, right? I would go into next steps to say that, once you know this, what do you then do, right? Which is our second step of prepare, right? The second thing that I would call out is, leverage your existing connects, right? So let's say your college seniors or your, neighbors or your colleagues, right? They may have appeared for these interview rounds, or they may already be part of Amazon as an organization, right? So they would know a little bit better about the hiring process and what really are the skills that the organization is looking for, right? So make sure that you connect with them and you try and gather as much information as you can, right? I would also say reach out. So it could so happen that maybe, let's say I'm targeting LinkedIn, and in my immediate circle, I don't know anyone who's working for LinkedIn or who may have appeared for an interview process with LinkedIn, right? What I can then do is probably use LinkedIn as a platform, or any other, professional website as a platform, to maybe reach out to people who are working in the organization and see if some of them will be willing to mentor you, to guide you, to briefly connect with you either on a chat or a call, to share either their interview experiences or broadly, what is the framework when it comes to the hiring process, right? So now, obviously, here you may not have like 100% hit rate, but in my experience, if I do reach out to 10 people, I have seen at least one of them will respond, and happily so. And that has at least worked for me. And I believe that, if you guys also go around doing that, it could work in some instances. And that knowledge is what you could leverage to prepare better, right? Another thing is, for some of these companies, the application process, right? So getting to apply or getting, to get interviewed for the very first round can be quite a challenge, right? And in which case I've seen that referrals tend to work a little bit better than other modes of applying to these companies, right? So again, if you have a connect, it would be great if you could, request them for a referral. And I would say here, don't feel shy, right? Because if in the end you do convert it, then even the employee will get a certain benefit in the form of referral bonus. And, just make sure that you provide the link or the specific job ID in which you are really keen on, so that, this person does not have to spend a lot of time in terms of referring you. So do that due diligence, but do reach out and try to see if you can get a referral, just so that, you're shortlisted for the first few rounds of the interview process. Right. The next one I would say is that if you are shortlisted and if the interviewer does call you, right, make sure to use, the time in which the interviewer or the HR is actually calling you to help you out, in understanding the role, etc. Right. Use that time to also get insights into the overall interview process, right? So typically the recruiter in the very first call will, help you understand whether it's going to be 4 rounds or 6 rounds, and what are really the expectations from each of the rounds, right? So some rounds may be more tuned towards checking your technical knowledge, some rounds may be more tuned towards checking your, product craft, and some rounds could just be like cultural fit, right? So make sure that in the very first call, you do spend some time with the recruiter just to get a high level sense of the process and the expectations from each of the rounds, right? Another thing that I would say is that, a lot of folks do actually share their interview experiences on social media, right? So whether that's LinkedIn, YouTube, or even, Glassdoor and other platforms. So it would be wise for you to actually take a look at some of these posts and content, so that, you can see what are the set of questions or the set of rounds that someone else actually went through while interviewing for these companies, right? So make sure that you do that due diligence at your end. Lastly, I would say, read the job description, right? So while it seems like some job descriptions may actually be very repetitive and iterative, in my experience, a lot of job descriptions are very well written, right? They exactly talk about the scope of the role as well as the expectations from the candidate, right? So make sure that you go through it really well, and make sure that, you make sure that you're able to articulate some of the traits, or the skill set that the JD is outlined for that particular role, right? So definitely go through it. Right now, this entire part that we covered was to make sure that you have a fair enough understanding on what the interview or the hiring process for an organization will look like, right? But now that I know all of this, right, now that I know that Amazon is going to test me on 14 principles, what do I do next about it, right? So I know that for Amazon, literally some of my friends, what they do is, they prepare like an Excel. So they will list out all the 14 principles in one of the columns, right? And for each of the principles, they will list out various ways in which the interviewer may be trying to test out on those traits, right? So for example, if I go back to the previous slide, the very first principle here was customer obsession, right? And a lot of other companies also have like similar values, right? For example, think customer first and so on and so forth, right? So for this kind of question, or rather for this kind of skill set or leadership quality, list out all the possible, questions or scenarios that the interviewer may test you on, right? So for example, in various rounds, I've been asked to say that, okay, you built a personal loan product, but how did you validate that there's a user need or a customer need for this product in the first place? Or once you were able to successfully ship out the MVP of the personal loan product, how did you gauge the user feedback, right? How did you understand whether the users have been able to positively use this product versus they did not understand intuitively the usage of this product, right? Another way of asking this question would be to say, in LinkedIn, I was asked this question once, that let's say, you take user feedback and your users tell you that they would like to have an option of being able to post anonymously, right? So what do you do with this kind of feedback that is directly coming from the users, right? Do you just go ahead and simply implement it? Or do you do your due diligence to understand the pros and cons of such a solution and really the intent of the user when they're recommending such a feature? Right. So basically make sure that you're able to convert your research into sample questions, and also write down exhaustive. When I say write down exhaustive answers, I mean that for each of those traits or qualities, really look through your experience to say what is that one story or what is that one experience that really truly captures that leadership trait which you would like to highlight in the interview process, right? I would also say go through the organizational values, right? So make sure that your answers are in coherence with the values that the organization really stands for, right? In no shape or form should you, in your answers or in the articulation of your answers, really invalidate some of the values on which the organization broadly works, right? So again, go to their website and take a look at their values, etc. And the last thing that I would say is that when you're trying to prepare for the interview, or prepare your answers for various, questions that you have identified, definitely make sure to use the STAR approach, right? Don't just start by saying that, okay, I had to build a product and, this is how I went ahead, building the product, right? Make sure that you articulate the situation and the task before the action and the response that you get, right? So make sure that you articulate what were the certain circumstances or the leadership guidance, or what was the reason why in the first place you started to think about launching a new product or launching a new feature, right? So make sure that you clearly articulate why you did something, and then go ahead to say how you did it and what was the results, right? So definitely at the back end, leverage the STAR approach in articulating your experiences to some of these questions. The third thing that I would say, so pay a lot of attention to step one and step two, but the third aspect is equally important, right? Which is essentially practice, practice, and do some more practice, right? So while you may think that, you have come up with really good answers and really good situations and scenarios, just make sure that you do a lot of mock interviews, right? So if you have a colleague or a friend or a mentor with whom you can actually bounce off some of these, answers that you've prepared for certain constructive feedback, right? Make sure that the story that you're trying to say actually lands itself in the way you want it to land, right? So definitely check for validation with someone, who could help you out on this front. And even if there's no one available, right? So it could be the case that, I'm trying to venture into this new field and I really don't have initial contacts. What I would recommend for you is to actually record your answers to some of these questions, right? That is what, I did for some of my initial interviews. I would record my answers and, hear it back to say whether whatever I was trying to say landed itself. And also, was it crisp and concise enough, right? You want to make sure that you're able to land your story or your experience, in a concise fashion. I would also say, sometimes, let's say my background is into the lending landscape and I'm appearing for a social media platform interview, right? Now, this person who is my interview in this case, I need to make sure that they really understand the concepts or the frameworks that I'm going to say which actually belong to the lending landscape, right? So this person may not know enough about this space, given he or she may be working on other spaces for a reasonable length of time. So make sure that you are able to articulate your stories in a way that any layman belonging to any domain knowledge can actually follow and understand. Don't just start, saying a lot of the keywords or terminologies or metrics, which only someone who has spent reasonable amount of time in an industry could understand, right? So make sure that it is simplistic enough for people from other industries to also be able to understand, right? And that is why I feel rehearsing and bouncing it off with people from other domains really helps, because they can give you a genuine feedback to say that, listen, you told me these 10 sentences, but I lost you after the second line just because you made it too technical or too specific to your own domain, right? So make sure that you test out on your storytelling skills, and basis the feedback, you continuously improvise your answers, right? The last thing that I would say is, just learn from your various interview experiences, right? You may have given 2 interviews or 20 interviews or 200 interviews. After every interview, if you do a self-assessment, I'm sure that there's a learning, right? There's a learning where you could have done better, or even in terms of, where you're interacting with the interviewer may have, hinted you towards a certain direction, which you didn't initially think of, right? So make sure that you maintain a list of all the interviews that you're appearing for, right? What are the kind of questions that are getting asked? And also, what were the learnings from each of these experiences, right? They can be really small, but they can also be like plenty in number, right? So make sure that you have like a record of it, which you can refer back to and improve in your next rounds of discussions. The last thing that I would like to call out is that, whether you make it into the interview round or you don't make it, make sure to ask the recruiter for feedback, right? It is very important for you to know where is it that you're doing a good job versus where is it, that the hiring manager or the recruiters are not being able to see a fit, right? And basically that feedback will really help you to improvise and do a better job, in your future rounds of interviews. And sometimes asking for feedback from the interviewer, or rather the recruiter, also really helps you to say that, okay, I wasn't probably good enough for this role because of, let's say, me not having enough domain knowledge, but if you do have future openings in this company in XYZ roles, I would be happy if you could consider my profile, right? So make sure that you have that kind of a true and fair communication with your recruiter, so that you have very good nuanced feedback. And also you're able to understand, or rather, make sure that you have that relationship with the recruiter, that they would be willing to consider you for certain other roles or openings that may come up in the future, right? So yeah, I think these were some of my thoughts around, how we can go about building more confidence, when we're trying to appear for some of these interviews. And how basically researching and practicing could really help us build more confidence and really ace some of these interviews. With that, yeah, I will take a pause here to see if there are any questions. And, I would also like to reiterate, with the thing that Piyush started in the beginning of the session, which is around how Pragmatic Leaders also offers PM courses, which could really help you through the theoretical knowledge, through a lot of assignments and through a lot of mentorship, really help you prepare well for the interviews, and just learn about product management in great depth. The June cohort is going to start, I believe, in the next week, and the registrations for those close on 2nd June. So if you do want to know more about the program, etc., please do reach out to Piyush or to the team or to myself for any queries around the program as well. So I'll take a pause here to see if there were any questions around the original topic that we covered here.
Thanks for the session, Sonupam. It was really amazing. We have a lot of questions right now. So we can start picking up some of them.
Okay, let me start from the bottom, right?
Sure. And I would also like to invite other speakers, Tanya, Weber, and Pamit, if you are with us. So.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Yeah, hi, I'm here.
So we can start picking up some questions. So I think we have certain questions asked for Sonupam specifically, so we can pick certain questions from there and then jump on to other set of questions.
Got it. So Piyush, would you be reading those out, or should I just go ahead from back to front?
I can read some of them.
Okay,
so
great.
Where I should start. I'm just checking from where I should start. There are a lot of questions.
Yeah, really interactive audience, I must say.
Okay, so I'll start with this question from Rohit. How to keep yourself on learning curve in product management role as product managers, more relevant for new products till they become stable.
So what I typically like to do are two things, right? So one is if you're fortunate enough to be in product management already, or if there's a way that you can shadow the role of a PM in your current organization, right? I think on-job skill sets really help. The other thing that you can do more offline is so there's lots of content on LinkedIn. There are several blogs as well as books available, right? So I feel like even in today's session, some books and some YouTube channels or some content creators were also highlighted, like Shreyas, etc. So it's a good thing to actually start following them and maybe, spending, I would say, anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour on a daily basis or, on like a weekly basis. And that really then, over a certain period of time, you would realize that, you have been able to develop or build, a PM mindset. That is what I would suggest. Anyone else who would like to share their thoughts on this one?
Okay, I think we can move to next one. Next one is from Jim. I am not very confident of business analysis math skill set. I am trying to improve them constantly, but I think the farthest I can reach is intermediate Excel and SQL. I am however confident about my soft skills, customer empathy, and any other relevant skill sets for product management. How do I go about exposing my strengths over my weakness during PM interview?
Yeah, I would say, so typically in your interviews, the hiring manager or the interviewer actually, want to hear from you around your resume, right, or hear from you around your work experience, right, and if that happens, which typically does, right, make sure to leverage that, right, make sure that you only talk about stories or skill sets or instances, which is where you want to spend more time with your interviewer, right. So it's very important to nudge the interviewer in the direction in which you would want them to, right? So for example, I was involved in launching of a new product and I feel like speaking about it is when I'm the most passionate and also from where I got most of my learnings, right? So I make sure to speak about it right in the beginning of my resume or when I'm being asked about my work experience, right? So that's one trait that you can use. Having said that, even if that does not happen, right, if even if you're not nudged towards giving a beginning of your work experience, or let's say the interviewer still takes it to a different direction where he or she may be interested in, uh, definitely speak about what the interview is really asking, but communication skills or softer skills is something that you would require irrespective of the project, right? So you can definitely leverage the articulation of how your soft skills or how your influencing mechanisms or negotiation skills really helped you get that product live or really contributed towards the success of the initiative that you were working on.